Mountain Side Podcast, and our returning guest for this episode is Colorado District Wildlife Manager Scott Murdoch. Scott is a wildlife biologist. He has served multiple years with Colorado Parks and Wildlife as a wildlife officer. I always enjoy having Scott in studio. We covered a lot of different subjects that pertains to wildlife in mountain regions, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Scott, thanks for joining us back here on the Mountainside, man. I always enjoy having you guys in.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
You know what? It's really nice to run into you in here and not the last couple times we ran into each other, you've been on a wildlife call and it's just me driving by. Or
what's the likelihood of running into you at that moment? I mean,
yeah, on a Sunday morning, right? Of all things.
Yep.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Do me a favor, just pull that mic just a little bit closer to you. You want to be pretty much right up on it. Yep. Yeah, that was a fluke thing. I mean, that was a beautiful buck, number one. So Sunday mornings, my family goes to church. They go to Flatirons, and I think we talked about that, but they go to Flatirons, and I go and do my own. That's my dad time.
Sure.
So I go out and shoot my bow. It's typically with one of my uncles, and he lives over in Conifer. So we were driving between I was driving between Evergreen and Conifer.
Yep.
And there's this beautiful buck standing in the road, and you were pulled off to the side. I was stopping to see if you actually needed help. I was like, oh, shit, that's Scott. I might as well see if he needs a hand. I don't have anything going on. And while I was talking to you, that buck came up and stuck his head in the window of my truck, like looking for food, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we had received a bunch of calls about that deer. It was probably one somebody raised from a pet or, had been feeding, for its entire life. And so it was super habituated, and deer are cute when they're little, right? But then once they hit maturity and they get their big antlers, and they can be pretty dangerous. And so this deer had actually gored a kid and had ran over a couple other people, chased some dogs. And, we actually believe it was the same deer that we were having similar issues the year previous down in Flying J Park. And so we were looking for this deer, and ultimately, when we have an animal like that's clearly lost its fear of humans. I mean, it was putting its head in our windows. I mean, I was having to push it away because it was trying to rake, its antlers on me, and so we're trying to push this deer away, and of course, the time when I actually find it, it happens to be in the middle of the highway, right when we cross paths
on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, and so it kind of is one of those situations that it's very difficult to deal with. You got the public that's there with an apparently healthy animal. It's obviously not acting quite right. What do you do? Ultimately in that situation, we ended up putting that deer down just because of the behavior that it's showing. That's not a good behavior, and somebody's going to get hurt. Unfortunately, the kid that did get gored by that deer is okay. But that kind of shows you why we don't feed animals, why we don't, hand raise animals that we think that are abandoned or whatever. And, this is the time of the year when the deer are starting to give birth. We've got elk that are hitting the ground. I saw a bunch of lambs the other day.
Those sheep pictures you sent me were great, man. If we can share them on here, I will.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Yep. Yeah. So sheep are hitting the ground. All the critters are out and about. And so, it's a time to be aware of kind of your surroundings, making sure that you're not, too close to those elk or whatever, and just give those animals space. Those animals aren't abandoned most of the time. So
that's the only time I've ever seen elk get real aggressive, or the cows anyways, is when they have calves. I've been chased occasionally.
Yeah. Well,
especially right where I live. Where I live, and
exactly.
Yep. They're in my yard half the damn summer. So
yeah. Well, in Evergreen Lake, you get all the people walking around the lake, and that's that's
actually where we've been chased, because it's kind of a bottleneck there. There's not a lot of spots to go on some of those trails, or there's a bridge, right?
It is, yeah. Well, and they like that little island complex, and so they'll give birth on that island. And then, of course, to get off the island, they've got to cross that path where everybody walks. And, if you happen to be right there, that's not a good spot to be.
Yeah,
so.
For sure. No, that's a shame with that buck, man, because that was a beautiful buck. I mean, I would have loved to run into him
right
during hunting season. And, you know.
Yep.
That I wonder, I think it was about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, right over where I live, we had a buck that kept coming to our sliding glass door, and he kind of looked similar, but like a few years prior to this incident. I wonder if it was the same one, because he would show up at my sliding glass door.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of interactions with this deer. He had kind of that unique configuration on his antlers, so he was pretty identifiable. But, I mean, that just displays, very typical habituated behavior because of feeding. And so we see that a lot in a lot of different neighborhoods. Generally, it's not to that extent, but it can be, and that's where it gets to be pretty dangerous. We actually have, I've dealt with a lot more people that get hurt by deer and elk and moose than I've ever dealt with in my career with bears and lions, surprisingly. Really? By a long shot.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So, and people think, well, it's just a deer. It's not like it's going to hurt me. And in most cases, it probably is not. But I've seen a lot more of those than bears and lions. And people are always terrified of bears and lions, but then they treat deer and elk with, little regard for safety in that way.
Yeah, we had a family friend that they have a fenced-in yard, and a buck jumped in their fenced-in backyard for their dog and gored their husky.
Yeah.
So I mean, it happens. You got to be careful.
Yep.
No. That's so when something like that happens, typically you guys get called. Unfortunately, you had to dispatch this buck. What do you guys then do with it? I mean, I know that you have some rehabilitated predators and stuff that you feed and stuff like that. But what generally happens to the meat and all that sort of stuff?
In this instance, we actually took it up to our Fort Collins lab. They did a full necropsy on it and kind of looked at it. Is there a neurological issue? Is there a disease issue? Is there a rabies issue? It turns out it's a perfectly healthy animal. And so that's one of those situations where that's not what we want to do, but unfortunately somebody took, taking care of this animal into their own hands, and now that animal's essentially lost its wildness, and that's ultimately the consequence of people being selfish.
And there's no real way to kind of track that, right? If somebody's feeding, I mean, obviously if you come across their property and they have feeders out or something, right? But in some states too, you get down south with whitetails and stuff, feeding is a normal thing. I mean, you can buy deer feeders and all that sort of stuff, but it's illegal here in the state of Colorado, correct?
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the big things that we deal with is we get a lot of folks that have moved from other states where it is legal, and that's part of the problem, right? Colorado's a hot spot for CWD, which is chronic wasting disease for those that are not familiar with it, and it's a fatal neurological disease that deer and elk can get, and it's pretty much kind of blown up around the United States, and all of these states that are seeing spikes are a lot of the states that allow for feeding, and it's really spread through the feeding vector, and that's part of the reason why it's illegal here in Colorado. But a lot of these states where feeding is legal, they're starting to kind of rethink what the best practices are, and it's about kind of changing the culture and the mindset of people. And when folks move to Colorado, they expect that they can do the same thing here, and our mule deer are quite a bit different than whitetails that live in cornfields or in ag pastures, and there's a lot to it biologically.
And what are some of those differences? Just I guess whitetail are a bit more skittish, right, than a mule deer.
Yeah, they can be. I would say, other than behavioral things, I think the biggest thing, because anatomically, the ruminants are very similar in that regard. Mm-hmm. The biggest probably difference is the migratory aspect of things, and so, a mule deer might live clear up in the high country in the summertime, and it's going to migrate down to low country. And so it may move 20, 30, 50, 100 miles. I think some of the studies they've done up in Wyoming, some of these deer are moving well over 100 miles from summer to winter range. And so they're inhabiting a lot of different kinds of habitats. They're eating a lot of different foods, whereas whitetail may live, in a few square mile area. And so, it grows up in a cornfield or grows up in kind of an alfalfa or soybean pasture, and it's eating those rich foods all year long. And so, they get real tolerant to the types of foods that they're eating, whereas
over hundreds of years probably, right?
Yep. And even the mule deer around here, they can become habituated to human type foods, the corn and the alfalfa, stuff like that. But where it's really impactful is when you get migratory deer that have no tolerance to these real rich foods, and they're migrating through, and then they eat something that's super rich, where they've been adapted to eating, things like twigs and leaves and sticks in the wintertime that are pretty low nutrient, and basically it shocks their system, and they can die from that. And so that's probably the biggest thing. But other factors, things like it disrupting their migration patterns. They can actually go from migratory animals to resident. I mean, you see resident deer and elk here in Evergreen that literally have stopped migrating because people have altered their habitat and altered the animal's behavior.
I think one thing too that I've noticed every once in a while, not on a regular basis, but like just around my neighborhood, is making sure that your trash is taken care of the right way, and spend that extra couple bucks a month to have those bear locking trash cans. Cause I've seen deer in trash cans, like getting a banana peel or whatever, so you're essentially feeding them, even though you're not directly handing them food.
Yep.
Like, if you're leaving, these bird feeders out and stuff where there's easy access to that, you're essentially feeding them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, animals are going to take the easiest route, right?
Yeah.
And so you just have to make things just a little bit difficult for them, and they're going to go somewhere else and seek other opportunities for food.
Yeah, we actually did a podcast too on deer migration. There was a film, 92 Miles, and the gentleman's name was Patrick. I forgot his last name. This is something I'm going to need you to look up for me, Gabby. It was, if you go to episodes, but anyways, it was an awesome podcast. If you want to learn a lot about deer migration, he was partnered with the University of Wyoming.
Yeah.
They did all these studies, and he actually ran a migration pattern on foot, like an ultra marathon. Yeah. Keep going down. I think it's in like the 40s, but we went up to the university and recorded with him up there. Patrick, I don't know what. Oh, Patrick Rogers, right there. Yeah, sure. That's a great podcast. Very insightful, and there's a whole backstory to that too. It's kind of to pay homage to his dad and stuff. So
okay,
yeah, that's a really good podcast if you want to learn about deer migration. And
sure,
it's pretty amazing what those bucks go through, especially up there. Coming out of Tetons country into
Is that down towards the Red Desert area where they're wintering? I think that's might be the same one that I'm familiar with.
A lot of it was how many fences they got across, and how we're disrupting that a little bit. And it's pretty insightful. So
yeah,
that film's really good too.
Yep.
It talks a lot about that and that. But
so that's actually something we've been kind of looking at too, as an agency. Is we've been looking at a lot of the migration stuff, and we're actually trying to do a much better job of tracking things like roadkills, right? If we're seeing areas that are consistently animals crossing roads, how can we improve that? Either through fencing or through overpasses, underpasses, and so that's a big focal point. A lot of what we're looking at right now, statewide as an agency. So
yeah, I think that's good. I think we could use one right here at Elk Meadow. I mean, I don't know how many times a year you think you get called up there to.
So we've been tracking that. It's actually lower than we expected. We have a lot more on 285 and even I-70.
Well, the signage has gotten so much better too in the last couple of years. Like you guys put up those huge construction, like flashing signs that say like "Watch out for elk" all summer long. Much.
Yeah. We still do have issues there. And that's where kind of this comprehensive look of looking at a statewide level and figuring out where is the most severe issues, because obviously if money is limited, so we're going to put the money in the places that we have the best bang for our buck. Yeah. And so looking at that at a statewide level, we've tracked roadkills for decades, but we've never tracked it to the location and this micro level before. And so hopefully that'll give us a little bit better idea of what are some of the priority habitats, locations, movement patterns. And we're also looking at, we've collared a lot of animals in certain areas, and that's going to help kind of, just influence, where we might do these types of projects in the future. So
that's great. Yep. I'm glad you guys are doing that. It always amazes me whenever I talk to you or another agent or somebody from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, how many different responsibilities fall on your plate as an individual, as the agencies. Can we just kind of talk about like what you do on a daily basis and what all you're responsible for? Is it
sure?
Can I call you a game warden
yep.
or is it a wildlife officer? Like what?
So we go by either one. Wildlife officer, game warden, either one. Game warden's kind of the traditional term. We, I guess, have kind of gone away from the game warden term. I think all the game wardens like that nostalgia of that name.
That's what I've known it as forever,
Sure, sure. Yeah, we manage, more than just the game. We manage the game and the non-game. And so that may be, small birds or reptiles, amphibians, stuff like that aren't necessarily hunted or fished for. But there's a variety of things we do. And I think we can probably break it down into three main categories. Well, maybe four. So first is law enforcement. Obviously, you see the badge. We do a lot of law enforcement, and it's somewhat seasonal depending on the location and district that you have. Hunting, obviously, is a high priority for us, making sure that hunters have licenses, they're following all the rules, staying safe. Fishing's really ramping up right now. The fishing's pretty good right now. Water's still fairly cool, but kind of picking up. And so fishing patrols, making sure people are keeping the right amount of fish, will help stock fish. We stock over 100 million fish into Colorado waters.
That's insane,
every year. And so that's a big part of what we do. I'm not so much involved in that particular aspect of things, but
like you guys backpack them into some of these high alpine lakes,
or
drop them in from planes, and
we use airplanes, horses. We'll backpack them in. A lot of them are trucked in if we can get vehicles into that area and kind of pumped into the lake. So that's a pretty cool aspect of our job. So we got law enforcement, we got the biological side of things, and so we're all biologists. I went to CSU, got a degree in fisheries biology, and we'll do sheep counts, we'll do goat counts, we'll do fish counts, elk counts, deer counts. We'll do aerial classifications in helicopter or in fixed-wing airplanes. We will do ground counts, all kinds of different things, right? If you're going to have wildlife, we got to know how many we have in order to manage them. I can't just say, X number of people can hunt if I don't have an idea how many animals we have. We don't want to overharvest. We don't want to necessarily underharvest because that's an opportunity for somebody. We got to know what the size structure is, say, of a fish population. And so all of those are biological surveys that we do as wildlife officers in conjunction with our wildlife biologists. We've got terrestrial and aquatic biologists that we focus, or that's their primary focus. They don't necessarily do law enforcement. So we'll help with that biological aspect. We do a lot of the customer service education type things as well.
Which is super cool. You guys have some awesome programs.
Yeah. So things like this that we're doing today, hunter education. Last year we did a bunch of stuff, coffee with the game warden here in Evergreen and Conifer, and that was a pretty good success of folks that aren't necessarily hunters or fishermen, but were able to come out and meet wildlife officers, learn a little bit about what they do, how they can play a role in wildlife management here in their communities. We'll go into schools. I talked to some kids at Elk Creek Elementary a couple weeks ago about poaching and some of the impacts poaching has on our wildlife populations. We deal with bear calls, mountain lion calls, all of the nuisance type wildlife that you may encounter. Ranchers that call about elk that are getting into their haystacks, or mountain lions that kill livestock, stuff like that. That's all kind of lumped into our customer service aspect of our job. And then kind of the last little portion of what we do is, I would say, habitat management / property maintenance. And so we've got state wildlife areas, and then state parks, which is on the park side. Obviously, the park rangers, they're focused on the management of the state parks. Wildlife officers don't really have much to do with that. But with the wildlife areas, those are managed solely for wildlife habitat primarily, and wildlife-related recreation, so hunting and fishing. And so the wildlife officers, in conjunctions with our technicians that usually live or work directly on those properties.
So is that kind of like the spot that's outside of a wilderness area? A lot of times you guys will have like a house or a property.
Sometimes. So like Mount Evans State Wildlife Area,
Love that spot.
That's a wildlife area that's managed specifically for wildlife habitat. So that's closed through June 15th still. And the reason it's closed is so that the elk can calve up there. And so once we've kind of drawn that cutoff at June 15th, they can we'll open that property up to other recreation. But really, it's managed for good habitat for the wildlife, and then also the recreation. And so part of our job is to help improve that habitat, right? We're not getting more habitat on our landscape. We're always getting less with roads and houses and trails and stuff like that. And so if we can maximize some of this habitat, we're going to be much better off. I'm working on a big timber project over kind of by Harris Park area for bighorn sheep. And so we're working on improving winter range for bighorn sheep over in that particular area.
Nice.
And so totally unrelated to law enforcement or education or something, but it has a pretty important impact on the wildlife. And so that's what's so cool about my job is, like, if you have a specific interest, you can kind of pursue that depending on what you like to do.
No, that's great. And I think it's amazing. Like, it took you, probably 5 minutes to explain all of what kind of falls on your guys' plates.
Yeah.
And I don't think that people really understand the science sometimes that goes behind. Like, when I talk to most people that maybe aren't a hunter or not an avid angler or something like that, they don't really realize how much science actually goes into managing populations, the counts that you guys do, and then who you're feeding that information to, and collectively making a decision right down to why we have certain game units with a certain amount of tags issued for a certain amount of species. I think you guys do a fantastic job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's so dynamic. That's one of the biggest challenges is just because you learn something about a population now, in 10 years, those migratory patterns may change. And so it's constantly evolving on how, you manage these populations. And then you throw in things like natural disasters, fires, floods, stuff like that, and that affects populations.
Changes everything,
And so you really have to be adaptive, and we kind of term it adaptive management, and we're always kind of changing and adjusting, and it makes it challenging. It's sometimes hard for the hunter or fisherman to predict, and it gets complicated. And so, we understand that. We know that it can be complicated for the hunter or fisherman to understand all those rules and stuff like that. But, from a biological standpoint, they do have a reason, for being there.
And the biggest thing that I've noticed too is, knowing if you do draw a tag in a game unit or something, the rules can change season to season. So being aware of, like, maybe what you did last year, and maybe you draw a deer tag in the same, area every single year, be aware of those rules and stuff, because I've seen them change on me, and I'm like, oh, I'm glad I read this.
Yep.
And like another thing I want to commend you guys on is Colorado State Parks and Wildlife is, if there's a gray area or something that I don't understand, there's pretty much an open line to call you if you know a game warden or wildlife officer. But the hotline's amazing too. Like, the couple times that I've called and been like, hey, I don't really understand what this means, or maybe you need help figuring out even where to go.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
You guys are super helpful in that. And to pick up the phone and be able to talk to somebody is a big thing, rather than, sometimes monotony of sending an email and then you get an email back and then it's like the whole 2-day like back and forth. And
yep.
Yeah, it's pretty
we
nice.
try to be responsive, and I think the advantage of talking with one of the wildlife officers is that they're passionate hunters and fishermen for the most part.
Yeah.
All the guys that I work with here locally all hunt and fish, and so we're all passionate about it. We can relate to the hunter or fisherman, and I think just being able to kind of, have that common ground with the sportsman is great.
Yeah. No, I think that's a huge thing too. Like, I guess the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk to you about today, just because, there's so much to talk about, but diving into all the different responsibilities that you have, the one thing that we haven't really covered here is poaching. And it's something that intrigues me because I don't understand why anybody would fucking do it in the first place. Pardon my language. We're not a kids show, but I just don't understand that mentality. And I'm kind of curious to see how often it happens. Like I remember a warden coming into Wilmot Elementary up here and talking to us about it. And I was super intrigued then. So I think it's great that you guys are still going into schools and talking about that. And, but yeah, I guess I just want to dive into that pretty heavily, if we
Sure.
can kind of talk about some of the experiences that you've had, some of the motives that you think are behind it.
Yep.
And, I don't necessarily want to dwell on how you catch guys, because I think that if they're listening to this,
Right.
that might give them some insight. But
Well, we won't give all our secrets
Okay,
away.
cool.
Yeah. No, poaching's pretty fascinating. It's one of those things where there's a lot of different motivations. And I would say, I guess maybe the first thing is let's define poaching, right? And so, we've got legal hunting. Okay, so folks have licenses. They've complied with all of the kind of provisions of that license. Those are all legal hunters, legal ethical hunters. And I would say the vast majority of the sportsmen and sportswomen out there are legal ethical hunters. When we term a poacher, right, a poacher is not a hunter, right? So that's somebody who is taking advantage of the system. They're either not following ethics, not following laws. They might not have licenses. They may be fraudulently obtaining licenses. They may be using illegal methods of take, or taking too many, or taking things that are not allocated on their particular license. And so that's really the definition of poaching. So anytime they take or attempt to take animals illegally, or they're acquiring licenses illegally, that's what we term poaching. And I think it's very important to have that distinct kind of separation between lawful hunters and poachers.
100%, because I think that gets crossed a lot in
does. Yep.
the public's eyes. And I almost consider poachers, if you want to categorize a trophy hunter, that is the most extreme trophy hunter that there is a poacher, somebody that's doing it illegally.
These hardcore poachers, they're no different than a criminal that's in the drug trade or something like that. They're bona fide criminals. There's no buts about it, really.
At the federal level, correct?
At really
it's a
any
federal
level,
offense, isn't it?
depending on what they're doing, okay. Sure. But I would say, there's wildlife violations that many people could potentially be charged with. There are folks that make mistakes. There may be folks that maybe take a little bit too much sometimes. Mm-hmm. Does that necessarily mean they're a bad person? Not necessarily, right? Sometimes the fishing's pretty good, and sometimes maybe a person, maybe I'll keep 8 trout today. There's clearly abundance of fish, and they take things into their own hands. Maybe not the best decision, probably not a terrible person. They just made a bad choice. So I would say there's probably 3 main factions of people who have wildlife violations. So I would say the first one is just complete ignorance. Like, I didn't know I had to have a fishing license. I didn't know I had to have a hunting license. probably more common with fishing than hunting. I mean, hunting, you have to have some training, right? You got to go through hunter education. You got to, it's a much more intensive process than just going fishing.
Yeah.
So that
you got to have some gear. You got to possess a weapon of some sort. Yeah.
So the ignorance kind of excuse doesn't work a lot with the hunting.
I'm sorry, I'm going to slow you down here just a little bit. I don't mean to interrupt you, but can we just kind of go through, so it's really for somebody that has never fished in their life, so they can understand, obviously it's pretty plain and simple. There's multiple different ways to obtain a fishing license.
Yep.
You can walk into just about any place that sells a fishing pole and you can buy a license at their counter.
Yep.
For a certain amount of days for the entire season. Do you guys sell lifetime? I think, isn't there a lifetime option?
Yeah, there is.
I've never done it. I guess I just buy it seasonally.
Sure.
But yeah, so there's multiple different ways. You can buy it online. They'll, CPW will mail it to you in the mail physically. So there's all these different ways. But what are why would you need to obtain a fishing license legally, and at what age and that sort of thing?
Sure. So fishing license, anyone 16 years or older is required to have a fishing license. And primarily the reason you would need one of those is in order to possess fish. And the way that we get fish into these waters is through the money gathered from hunting and fishing licenses. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife is unique in that, at least the wildlife side, all of the funds that are generated are through the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. And so we don't get state tax dollars. We do get some federal excise tax money. So if you buy hunting or fishing equipment, some of that money will be reallocated back to the state, but it's not like a sales tax or any sort of tax like that, income tax. And then we also do get some GOCO money. So if you play the lotto, you actually do help fund some hunting and fishing things, right? So if you're going to lose at lotto, you may as well pay for wildlife. Yep. But really, I mean, if we didn't have that license money from fishing licenses,
so important,
we wouldn't have any fish to raise and stock into these lakes. And so, that's kind of the simple and straightforward answer on why we have that rule.
And I think it's pretty amazing that if you're a 15-year-old kid, you don't have to, you still have to abide by all the rules, right? And sometimes the rules change a little bit if you're a younger age, right? I think Rocky Mountain National Park, I noticed on some of the streams, if you're under a certain age, you can use live bait, and then everything else is artificial. But it's been a few years since I've been up there.
So it's controlled federally, so it's through the national park system, so that's not something that we deal with. Mm-hmm. Generally, I would say most places around the state, the fishing rules are the same for youths versus adults. When it comes to hunting, there's some more... some different rules, and as far as allowing additional opportunity, especially in late seasons for different hunting opportunities. There's some pretty awesome hunting opportunities for the youth that are different, obviously, than adults. But fishing, for the most part, is pretty standard for adults and youths, with the exception they don't need they don't need a fishing license when they're 15 or under. But if they wanted to fish with an extra rod stamp, then they would have to have that. Okay. But that's a pretty minor cost. Yeah. So
no, but I think that's amazing that it gives the youth something to do with.
Totally.
It's essentially free, other than buying your equipment. You know. So.
Well, and even for the 16 and 17-year-olds, it's at a reduced price. Yeah. So really, until you're 18, it costs you almost nothing.
That's awesome. So that's how it should be.
Yep.
That's great. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you or slow you down. We'll keep going down this poaching and the licensing and all that sort of stuff.
Sure. So, like I said, we've got kind of three components: people that might be ignorant of the law. A lot of the laws, especially with hunting, can be complicated, and you're like, oh, I didn't know I had to have my ATV or my gun fully enclosed in a case and completely unloaded on an ATV. You may have missed that. Right. Okay, no big deal. We can handle that. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's a ticket, but that's probably not a bad person. then we get the person that maybe takes a little bit of an advantage of a situation. So, fishing's really good. Maybe I'll keep, twice my limit versus just my normal limit. So that's somebody that clearly knows, I know what the law is, but I'm going to do what I want. I might be a little selfish in what I'm doing, maybe make a poor choice. Most of the time, these are the folks that know what they're doing is wrong, but they decide to do it anyways. So certainly deserving of a citation. Some of these can be pretty severe depending on what they're doing. And we're all human, right? People make poor decisions, and then
I've made plenty of them in my life,
right? And then they make another poor decision, or they lie, and then it kind of compounds that. And so that's a situation where it's this person's probably not a bad person, they just made some bad choices or a series of bad choices. And then I'd say you get down into the most severe of the poachers, right? These are the guys that really, they've got a complete disregard for all of the laws. They could care less about the animals or the value of the meat. These are the people that are killing animals, taking their heads off, leaving the carcasses, just really the worst of the worst. Don't even buy licenses. They're baiting. They're lying about residency. And those are really the ones that we like to target because, they're really stealing all of that wildlife from every other legal hunter or fisherman. And unfortunately, we have a bunch of that up here in Conifer and Evergreen by both residents and non-residents.
Wow. So
actually, one of the best cases.
That's disheartening.
Yeah, it is. But like I said, that's 1% of all of the sportsmen and women that are out there.
100%.
And so
I don't think that you can even put them in the same category as a sportsman because
totally.
At that point, I don't think that you are. You're basically, in my eyes, you might as well be charged with murder.
Right.
In a sense, right? I understand that there's a difference between a human life and an animal's life, but really, is there? I guess we got to kind of ask that question. But like you said, there's no disregard for putting a value on something, or it's not even so much about not following the rules. It's just as an ethical hunter, like part of how I was raised is we have some traditions when you do take an animal, and it's an emotional thing for me every time that I do. And to see somebody desensitized to that or not have any sort of emotion when a life expires, whether it's a fish or, it gets more severe as the animal gets bigger and more majestic, I think, a little bit. But even then, I think you should respect it, and there's no respect in a situation like that.
Yeah. I think you and I would probably agree that we don't hunt to kill, right? We kill as a part of hunting. We kill to have hunted. And that's, I think, a pretty critical distinction. A lot of these guys that we deal with are just killers. They just want to kill things.
Exactly. That's why I was classifying it as murder, because if you're gonna, it's a murder basically in my eyes, I guess. So
yeah, I can totally understand how you see it, and I think,
was that a bit aggressive?
Right. But I can certainly understand your perspective, and to me, when I deal with the poacher, it's infuriating because it's like I've worked hard to earn that meat that provides and sustains me and my family throughout the year, and then somebody to go and just kill an animal, cut its head off, and leave and waste that meat. That's pretty insulting.
That's a great point too.
And that's directly taking from somebody that could have had that opportunity down the road. Maybe it was a kid, maybe it was some old guy, whatever. It doesn't really matter, but it's that direct kind of assault against the rest of the hunters and anglers. So
no, 100%. So what are, what are some of the most common, like that extreme level of poaching? What are some of the most common things that you guys run into?
Sure. So I would say as of recently, I've been dealing with a lot of residency type violations. So somebody who is a non-resident claiming to be a Colorado resident. So now they're able to get tags that they may have not ordinarily been able to draw. A lot of these tags here in Colorado take a lot of years, even for residents.
Oh, it's a lifetime if you're going to hunt a bighorn sheep or something like that.
And so these guys will lie, it's amazing the kind of the network of fraud that they create in order to make it look like they're a resident. But they'll make it look like they're a resident so that they can draw licenses easier and get that discounted price as well.
Significant discount too.
Yeah, and so that's a big one that we've been seeing lately that I've been working. And it's frustrating because all of those residents that would have had that opportunity, this person's now in that same kind of pot of competition for that same license. So
do residents take preference over non-residents as far as the draw goes? Or?
So there's an allocation.
Okay.
And different licenses have a different allocation, but generally, say we had 100 licenses, the majority of those would go to residents.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's kind of cool. So it's not even really a money thing.
Yeah, it's both. And some of the motivation could be money, but some of the motivation is totally draw odds.
Oh, I mean on their end, but I'm saying on
Sure.
the state's end, they're not being greedy with because, for example, for an elk tag, I think, what is it, $55 this year? Or?
Yeah, it's
I never
pretty
pay
inexpensive.
attention. I just go.
Yeah, I'm going to buy it anyways.
I'm going to buy it no matter what the cost is. But for an out of state, I think it's close to $600 or something.
Yeah, it's closer
right?
to $700.
Is it?
Yep.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
So, that's a significant amount of revenue.
Yeah, we could absolutely sell more licenses to non-resident and make more money, but, the residents of the state deserve to have that opportunity to
probably
hunt.
And also there's some environmental impact to that too, I would imagine, because you have more people probably camping and
certainly could. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, that's good to know.
Yep. So residency is probably one of the more common ones, and then just overall no licenses, or having the incorrect license. That's pretty common as well, is that you'll get folks that'll have over-the-counter tags, hunting in limited units, which essentially you're hunting without a license at that point because, if you have a license that's not valid for the particular area or season that you're in, you're hunting without a license. That license is not valid for that particular spot. So any animals that are taken on those licenses would be illegal there.
Yeah.
The most severe kind of poaching thing that we end up dealing with is that trophy aspect of things of, hey, I'm going to go kill the biggest animal I can find, cut the head off, leave and waste the meat. That's kind of, we typically say that's the kind of the most egregious. It's called willful destruction of wildlife. That's actually a felony, so it's a big deal. And I would say more of the kind of serious poachers, they'll often, keep a lot of the meat. It's funny, you'll have different factions of folks that'll have different ethical kind of thoughts. Some will be like, well, if you waste meat, that's, you're the scourge of the earth, but I don't need a hunting license to, still. So it's like you have different factions of what folks feel is appropriate, even though they're still all breaking the law. Whereas other folks, it's like, well, we're not going to follow any of the laws, including that willful destruction aspect of things. And we've dealt with that a bunch. But that's probably the most severe because it is so insulting to everybody about look, we're not keeping any of the meat. We're going to just take the trophy parts, which is, super distasteful for both hunters and the non-hunting public as well. The hunting public, the non-hunting public overall is pretty supportive of hunting, especially when, the meat factor kind of comes in. Yeah,
and the ethics, I think. I would say 95% of the hunters that I've talked to are very, they probably care more about the animals than the average person going to Starbucks or whatever and eating a vegan lifestyle, or not to categorize them, but I feel like sportsmen versus non-sportsmen, and if you did a survey about how much, if there was a way to measure care or love or however you want to categorize that, I would say that 95% of the sportsmen are adamantly passionate about that species of animals.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you see all the conservation groups that hunters are members of, and they're volunteering their time to go remove fence for wildlife. They're going to do habitat projects or contribute their money and their time to these things like Elk Foundation or Turkey Federation or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of time and commitment that people put in, and most of those are sportsmen.
Yeah,
so,
and most of those guys are blue collar guys too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're the working class, for the most part.
Yeah. So
hard earned money. So
right.
So if I guess with the most common or the most severe poaching, those guys that are just after the trophy parts of the animal, are a majority of them turning them around to a black market to make money, or is it a personal greed, like, look at this rack, or
I would say it's there certainly can be a commercial aspect, especially with the the antler trade being where it's at. I mean, shed antlers are super valuable for dog chews primarily, but some of those animals that are legally taken, I'm sure, are going down that route. I would say more commonly it's about ego, of hey, look at me. Look how good of a hunter I am. I killed this gigantic bull. I shot it back in the wilderness. Little did they know I shot it off the golf course in Evergreen and poached it.
Right.
And so that's the I would say that's probably the biggest thing when it comes down to the trophy aspect of things. When you get guys that shoot one too many animals or stuff like that, I think that kind of falls into more of a careless type situation, or kind of in that middle ground area where the person's just maybe taking an advantage of the situation, but they may not necessarily be that hardcore criminal poacher. But I would say mostly ego, for sure.
And then when a violation like this happens, how often are you guys bringing somebody to at large? I mean, is there a percentage, like,
I wish I knew
50% or
I wish
90%?
I knew, because you just never know how much is going on.
Right.
I think the advantage of working in and around conifer and evergreen is that we don't have the massive numbers of hunters like some of the western slope units that have
private land, right?
Yeah. And so our wildlife officers can kind of focus on certain areas around conifer or evergreen, or maybe we get a tip on something and kind of can dig on something and figure out, okay, is there something here, or is there something, or is it not a big deal? Whereas when you're working some of those western slope districts, I used to live up in Grand Lake, it was just so busy. I know there was tons and tons of poaching occurring, but it was just, there was so much going on that it was hard to commit time to starting a bigger investigation. And so I think that's part of the advantage of living around conifer and evergreen, is we can focus on some more of that stuff. And some of these cases may take years to develop. I'm working one right now that's at least 2 years old when I first kind of started learning about some of this stuff. Another one that we finished up a couple years ago, kind of in the Soda Creek area. That one, the individual had
some massive bulls over there.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of them photographed. Like, that's one thing I love to do in the fall, is go out and take photographs, and always over there in Soda Creek is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This guy, he poached, one of the bulls that he poached was 371 back in there. Probably shot it at night. But that bull, well, there was a bunch of bulls. He had killed, I think, 5 and a buck over the course of 6 years. And that started in 2013, and we didn't even really cue this investigation up till 2018.
Wow.
And so, we're having to go back and try and kind of recreate what all's happening. And it was pretty involved investigation, but that was probably one of the more severe poaching cases that we dealt with. That individual was out of Texas, who just happened to have some relatives here in kind of the conifer area. So that was kind of his connection to this particular area. But he was particularly savvy, and we had kind of inklings that things were occurring over there. We had animals show up with arrows in them, and just some weird kind of, stories or reports that really didn't lead anywhere. But we're just kind of curious in the back of our mind, and now without question, I'm sure it was stuff from this person.
Wow.
So, yep.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean, I don't know. It's just disheartening to me. Right. I don't mean to get emotional about it, but it makes me angry.
Yeah,
like
totally.
There's very few things that make me like angry, but that is one thing that makes me angry.
Yep.
So if you do bring somebody to large at this point and say that they're that most extreme, you mentioned it was a federal offense. It's beyond even a federal offense, right? Because you lose some hunting and fishing privileges for life, right?
Yeah, so we'll kind of go back. So I primarily enforce state law. So most of the stuff that I deal with is state law. Now, if we have wildlife that's been transported across state lines, then it becomes a federal issue. Or say it becomes, say it's been killed on Rocky Mountain National Park and moved. There's a federal nexus to it. So depending on the situation, we may be able to pursue federal issues. We may not. We work closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when we're dealing with federal issues. And so that one I talked about in Soda Creek, that guy was out of Texas. And so I actually went down to Texas and worked with Texas game wardens down there. We didn't actually end up filing things federally just because we ended up getting kind of a better deal through the state system. But we work down and, we work with those other officers across state lines. I've also done cases in Montana and Georgia, Missouri, Nebraska.
Wow.
And so we're working closely with those officers, but we're also coordinating with the federal agents, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife officers, depending on the
okay, so that's
the best
like
route.
An entire different agency then when it comes
Correct.
to that
So it's
federal
basically
level.
like, it'd be the wildlife agency for the United States. And so
Okay.
they're dealing with like the big stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So the ports, so like DIA, they have an inspector there. So any wildlife that comes through the airport, internationally or wherever, they're inspecting all that wildlife. And it's pretty amazing the stuff that has come through the different ports coming into the United States.
Well, it's so easy to book a hunt around the world now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I bet there's a lot to keep track of because,
Yep.
I mean, you can go online and book a hunt in Africa if you have the money.
Yep.
Probably tomorrow.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a big wildlife trade, way more than probably folks ever realize. I hear stories from the Fish and Wildlife agents about different things that they're working, and it's like, it even shocks me, and I've seen a lot, which it's pretty unfortunate. But
no, it's unfortunate too. Yeah, that there's that much of a big black market. We had a family friend that was a federal wildlife officer, and I just only heard this through, a third party, but some of the stories that we got from him, just what was going on locally, and I think he was here in Colorado, was pretty amazing. And some of the people that they would go after and the lengths that they would have to go to, like flying around the world to go catch guys,
Yep.
Pretty amazing.
Yep.
Well, I think we've covered poaching pretty heavily. We covered a lot with the wolf population here. That's a big subject with them getting reintroduced and how many wolves are here. And I get asked all the time, like if I know, and will I ask when you guys are in? So I don't know what you can answer and what you can't.
Sure.
But as far as wolf populations go, where are we at right now? And the introduction hasn't started until 2024?
Yeah, so it'll be a while. That's still a little up in the air. We've got a working group that is kind of working through a lot of the wolf reintroduction stuff. Probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now is the wolf has been relisted. So relisted as an endangered species. So when the ballot initiative went through, the wolf was not listed as endangered. And so there's some management implications. Initially, when it's not listed, the state has management control. When it's listed, then that shifts over to the federal level. And so there's some different ways, and a lot of this is above my head on the specifics on how that's going to be kind of handled. But I think our working group is kind of sorting out with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on how that introduction is going to take place with this new change in the way that wolf is listed under the Endangered Species Act.
Okay. So if you see a wolf in the state of Colorado currently, it is on the endangered species
correct
list.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no legal way that you can take a wolf unless it's endangering your personal life. And when it comes to population, we know of at least 6. Right? I guess we know of 6. We've got a male and a female, and then the 4 young that were birthed in Colorado last summer, and that was up in that Walden area. And I think they're kind of up in that Walden area, Larimer River area, and I don't know a lot of the specifics on those particular wolves.
Sure. But none in this region, specifically on the Front Range.
We know of none on the Front Range. We know none of in any other parts of the state. We do investigate sightings. And so just a couple weeks ago, we had a sighting of 5 wolves up in South Park, kind of just south of Fairplay. And the report was there were some elk. The report actually included that an elk was killed. There was some video of some large canines kind of running through, and you could see the elk in the foreground. And from the video, it looked very kind of intriguing. Like, this could be something. This is certainly worth investigating. There's clearly not coyotes. And so we had a team of folks that went up and did some, looking around. And we found at least, I think it was 5 individuals, all very large tracks. Clearly the possibility was there that these could be wolves. And what was neat is they were able to find some spots where that animal or those animals, peed in the snow, went under the fence, left a bunch of hair on the fence. And then there was one spot where one of them had a kind of a cut foot. And so we were able to get DNA from the blood and DNA from hair in the urine. And so those were submitted to our lab, and it came out they were domestic dog.
No way. So a pack of domestic dogs?
Yeah, and so we actually had learned that the day later that a group of I'm drawing a blank. What's the Beethoven dog? What are those?
Oh, it's Burmese mountain dog? Maybe?
Yeah, I think they were.
You want to
those.
look this up, Gabby, and see if you can figure out what kind of breed of dog Beethoven was?
Right. Anyways, it was one of those types of dogs. But there was a group of 5 of them that happened to get loose, and we learned through with the Park County Sheriff that, hey, these dogs were running at large. And so we had Saint Bernards.
That's what it is.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of the dogs. What's the dogs that they have? There's a lot of
those white ones.
Up in the white ones, the sheep dogs.
Yeah. I'm drawing a blank on their
gnarly,
name too.
Man, because we used to hunt up. Why am I drawing a blank? Heart Lake, Flat Tops Wilderness, and those dogs. You do not want to cross those dogs, man.
Right. They're big.
They're protective as all get out. But,
yep.
Yeah.
But so in any case, that's what it was. Was those Saint Bernards that were running loose, and
so 5 Saint Bernards, huh?
Yeah, this person had a whole bunch of them. They had a whole bunch more even.
So was the owner aware that this was happening, or?
Well, they were kind of in contact with the sheriff's office, and we were too. But we wanted to do our due diligence and make sure that this was not. Actually wolves. We actually never did find any sort of elk carcass, so I'm not sure where that came from in the report. We actually got up in the airplane and flew all of that country. We saw coyotes. We actually saw bobcat. We saw elk, but we didn't see any actual
Some of the
wolves.
coyotes can get big out there too, man.
Sure.
I've seen some monsters out in South Park. That's crazy. Back in my rock and roll touring days, we would go to Romania on occasion.
Oh, interesting.
And they have feral dogs there, and they're in the city.
Really?
And it'd be a pack of 30 or 40 of them.
Really?
And you just hear these things coming down, barreling down a street, just wreaking havoc, and everybody seeks shelter.
Oh, I bet.
we were at a particular festival, so it was an outdoor show, and it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. I never saw them like go after anybody, but people like got out of the way, like they do attack people, you know. But I mean, it was everything from like little Chihuahuas to like Saint Bernards to, you know, and this mix, just gnarly looking dogs with like dreads on them, and it was kind of disheartening, but like it was wild, man. Like, so I know when dogs can get around each other, they can, you know, if they're have that wild tendencies, that's their typically instinct. A wolf. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's crazy.
But so that's probably the most credible report that we've had, you know, as of recent, which obviously turned out to not be wolves, but that's a good thing. Just a matter of time before the more move down as well. Yeah. So
we're definitely going to be living with them, and I would, you know, I think that. What do you think would be some of the most common issues that you'd have with a wolf? Because I've been up into Yellowstone trying to photograph them, and I've never even got the opportunity. They're elusive, and the couple times that I did see a wolf or what I thought was a wolf, it was so far away it was hard to tell.
Sure.
Do you think that there's going to be some conflict between humans and
I think
wolves?
There's going to be pretty significant conflict at some point. Probably initially more with the livestock component. We've already seen that. We've had a number of livestock that have been killed by the wolves up in Wyoming, or excuse me, up in Walden. And we've been trying to get pretty creative on how to reduce, you know, some of those conflicts with that landowner. So time will tell. I mean, that's going to be something that will probably be pretty significant, is the livestock conflicts initially. But as with any wildlife, right, there's probably a pretty decent chance that we're going to have human interactions as well.
Especially in this state, because the one thing I noticed about it is like these states like Wyoming, Montana, you know, even when you get up into British Columbia and some of those spots, the condensed population that's here in Colorado is like 9 to 10 times, if not more, than what I think the city of Lakewood is equivalent. I can't say this word right now. I've been fumbling over my words the last couple of days. To the entire population of Wyoming.
Yeah, and I've heard that comparison as well.
It's wild.
You know, and our population here in Denver likes to get outdoors, and so they're going to be out in the outdoors. I mean, we already have people that get attacked by bears and lions and coyotes and all of those types of things, and so it's not...
I know it's hard to say or hard to predict, but what would you say is the most, between a wolf, a mountain lion, and a bear, what are you most commonly going to have human interaction with and potential danger, threat, or even attacks?
I'm going to even pull out a different category, probably moose, deer, and elk, by far, probably the three more likely. Man, it's tough to say. You know, I don't have a real great background on wolves, so I don't know a lot of their, you know, propensity to do that type of thing. I will say with coyotes, especially in areas that are not hunted, so like the urban areas of Denver, Lakewood, Highlands Ranch, Wheat Ridge, we have a number of coyote issues, you know, and there are issues where people get bit. And coyotes all across the country, that's a pretty typical thing.
California is really bad.
And so, you know, coyotes are very similar, obviously, with wolves. So there's certainly that possibility that there's going to be, you know, a lot of conflict directly with wolves and either humans, livestock, or people's pets. So I would foresee that probably, you know, potentially being a bigger cause for concern than really our bears and lions. I mean, our bears, for the most part, don't want anything to do with people. The incidences where I've dealt with people getting attacked or hurt has been a bear that's gotten into a house and the person happens to be in front of the door that the bear wants to leave through. And so, you know, the bear kind of swats the person and goes out the door and really is not wanting to hurt the person. They just want to escape.
That's really the only reason why I lock my doors at night, honestly. Right? It's like I'm not really that afraid of people up here, but like the occasional bear that might want to come in and figure out what we had for dinner, you know?
Yep. But that's really the only situations that I've dealt with people that get hurt by bears. The other one is when people are feeding the bears, and we've had a few people that have gotten killed over the years. I think a lady over in Uray was killed, and she was actively feeding the bears. I can't say for sure about the incident down in Durango.
Right. Was that last season? Or?
Durango, I think, was last year, and
last year, yeah.
I don't know the details on that. I don't want to comment on that, but mountain lions, again, are going to be exceedingly rare. You know, the difference with bears and mountain lion attacks is that if you get attacked by a mountain lion, it's probably going to be pretty severe.
Yeah.
Whereas a bear,
that's what scares me the most.
Yeah.
They're killers, man.
Yeah. Fortunately, you're a big guy, so it's
yeah. Hopefully, I'm deterring them from the get go.
Much less than say your kids.
Oh, kids is
something like that.
I mean, I do certain things around my house, and you know where I'm at, and it's not. I've seen cat tracks through my yard.
Oh yeah.
Typically they're coming in at night, but I'm pretty conscious about just keeping the grass cut. Any shrubs, anything like that, any spots where they can hide. After talking to you guys multiple times and other people, and just growing up here with them, it's something that it's living with wildlife, right?
Sure.
And like, you can't be afraid. Like, I grew up here playing in these mountains, and over in Conifer, and down around Lost Creek Wilderness, we used to be able to just go in there as kids by ourselves. And down there in that area, there's a lot of lions, right? Like down towards Pine and all that sort of stuff. So I've had interactions where I've seen tracks and stuff, but out of all those years of me spending all that time, probably thousands of hours in the backcountry, if you would consider that backcountry, I've only seen one lion.
Yeah.
And it was from a school bus, and it was at like 4:00 in the morning, way the hell back here. And it wasn't a big cat either.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of cats around, but the number of interactions we have is fairly low, considering the number of people that we have out and about. The cats really don't want or view you as prey. It's very seldom that anything like that ever occurs. You have a far more likelihood of getting, attacked by a person or injured in a car accident than you have from a mountain lion. But you certainly don't want to be
you don't want to
careless.
Be caught off guard. Yeah.
You don't want to be letting your 3-year-old play at night in your backyard, which is mountain lion habitat, right? You use some common sense and just be smart about it, and you're probably not going to have an issue.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Most of the attacks that have happened in the state have been on children, right? Like
children or smaller statured people. We had Scott Lancaster over in Idaho Springs that was killed. He was, I think he was younger than 20.
That was a while ago, right? That was in
it might have been in the 90s. But smaller statue guy running alone. And was killed. We had a young boy that was pretty severely injured over in Bailey a couple years ago that I dealt with. And that kid absolutely would have been killed had his dad not stepped in. So his dad absolutely saved his life. And that was a situation where he had multiple cats. So, mama is struggling to find enough food to feed these 4 other cats. And so that's a situation where, those animals are just getting a little bit more desperate.
We had one right here on Main Street, didn't we? Where there's like a emaciated cat or something that
We've had a few. I don't specifically remember that, or I didn't deal with that one.
I think it attacked a lady's dog, and it was like right here.
Yeah, it may have. I don't know of any human attacks directly around here. We had a kid, I think he was 10, over in Grand Lake that was attacked, and he ultimately, choked on his vomit. That's how he ended up dying. But that was kind of the other mountain lion incident in recent history, I guess. But for the most part, we don't have a lot of mountain lion issues. And I think part of that's because we do hunt them. We do manage them for their populations. And, the mountain lion population so directly tied to the abundance of their prey, which is primarily mule deer. And as prey, we're managing prey populations through hunting. It only makes sense to be managing these predator populations through hunting as well, because if you if these animals don't have enough prey, they're going to start looking for other things. And so, you don't want to have overabundance of mountain lions, because they're gonna eat something, or they're gonna starve to death, and then you don't want animals just having
makes so much
to
sense
suffer
to me.
needlessly. Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not even going to go down the political road, and we don't need to with you. I'm here for the scientific facts. So
Sure.
But yeah, I guess we've covered feeding with wildlife. What are some other common mistakes that people make in just dealing and living with wildlife that can be easily avoided, that are super important? I mean, feeding is probably number one, right?
Sure.
Everybody sees a cute deer on the road, or even if it's down to a squirrel or chipmunk, right? You don't want to be feeding them your peanuts or whatever. But is there anything else that you guys deal with on a regular basis that's...
So I would say two things.
Uh-huh.
In the summer time frame, we deal with bears constantly. And I mean, the bear problem is so simple. Like, if you remove the attractant, the bear goes somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's as simple as that. And so secure your trash can, get rid of your bird feeders, burn off your barbecue grill, make sure your dog food's not available for the bear. Just remove the attractant. Like, that bear's got to get a ton of calories. And if it's, if it's getting easy calories through trash, it's going to keep on coming back. And then that leads to bears getting into houses, bears getting into cars, and ultimately us having to put bears down. So, just secure your trash. Secure your trash, button up your property, look around. What kind of things do you think a bear would eat? And if there's something out there that you think a bear would eat...
anything, by the way.
I know. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Just get rid of it. Secure your chickens, secure your livestock, stuff like that. Electric fence is great. You can put that around your trash can. You can put that around your livestock.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Electric fence is probably the best tool that we have. And so, it doesn't take a lot, but just do something.
One year after Halloween, we were having a problem in the fall where a bear was coming in and getting into my bear-proof trash cans too.
Yep.
He could figure out, he was either depressing the thing or literally just with brute force,
Sure.
ripping the tops off of it. So we had this stupid skeleton clown thing, and it was on a motion sensor. So I just hung it on the trash can, and he didn't come back. I would hear that thing go off at 2 or 3 in the morning, and be like,
Yep.
whatever it did.
But that's the thing. Just be creative. You can come up with all kinds of different things. That's a perfect example.
Yeah,
so.
no, it was awesome. I wish I would have got that on a trail cam or something.
Right.
And I actually
if you
stole
do,
that idea.
I want to get that.
Yeah, actually,
So.
well, I saw it online first is what gave me the idea. And I
Okay.
was like, oh, we have something similar to that. I'll just
Sure.
hang that thing on the... It scared me when I walked by. So
I know,
was like,
right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we deal with commonly is entanglements of wildlife. I mean, it's constant in the fall.
Swings, all that.
Swings and tires and tomato cages and, you name it. I've probably seen it in the
There was
antlers.
a bull running around here last year, I think, that had a volleyball net. That was just, yeah.
Yep. In just a couple weeks in October, September, October, me and the other guys, we tranked probably a dozen animals that had stuff tangled
Really?
in their antlers or around their necks.
Christmas lights.
Christmas lights. Everything. We've seen it all. Hammocks and volleyball nets. And, I've seen basketball hoops around elk's necks, things that get caught on their hooves, cans and bottles. And I've seen a Home Depot bucket wrapped around a deer's neck. You name it. That's probably one of the most common things we deal with in the fall. Especially once the bucks start raking their antlers. Yeah. They just start raking their antlers on everything, and they start getting entangled. And so just doing a quick once-over of your property of okay, if I had antlers, what would I get tangled up in? Because, we're fortunate that we're able to tranquilize some of these animals and cut all that stuff out of their antlers. But who knows how many, get a volleyball net around their antlers and then go get caught up in the forest and
Right.
Die that we never know about.
Yeah.
And some of the calls that we get, swing sets, stuff like that, they'll choke themselves and we can't do anything about it, obviously, at that point. But
yeah.
So
one thing that I've noticed in the neighborhood that I live in is we've seen a big turnover with the real estate market being as viable as it is right now, with people from other states moving in. And I'm not knocking any of those people. I think anybody's welcome, but they're putting up these huge privacy fence, like 8-9 feet, tall privacy fence, or 6 foot around their entire property. What type of impacts do you think that'll have on wildlife locally? I mean, obviously it's going to drive them more onto the roads where there's more potential to get hit by cars or.
Yeah. So there's probably a couple things. One is the direct loss of habitat, right? If you have a tall fence, you're physically limiting those animals from utilizing your property. And it might be a 1 acre property, it might be a 35 acre property, but that's direct habitat loss. The other thing is now you've modified their habitat, so they have to utilize that habitat different. Maybe your property was kind of a migration corridor because all your other neighbors had tall fences. And so those animals were able to move through the neighborhood through yours because you had low fences. And now you've blocked it. Now they may not use your neighborhood as much because they can't get in or out of it as well. And then we also have direct loss from animals that either get tangled in the fence. A lot of times these tall fences, they'll jump into the fence and break their neck, which is super common, especially if the animal's startled. This time of the year, we'll have a doe that'll hop into a backyard, and then they'll give birth, and then this little, few-day-old fawn can't get out because it doesn't have that ability to jump like that. And so, if you don't have anything secured in your backyard and deer are utilizing your property, leaving those gates open is important this time of the year. Yeah.
We get elk that calve in our yard all the time. And Yeah. We've had similar thing. I got a short dog fence, but I've had to go and open the gate so the calf could get out.
Yep.
It was actually the day we moved into our house. We showed up and there's an elk calf, and my family, we're young. They hadn't lived in Colorado in a few years, so.
Yep. One of the things that we do, I do a kind of a talk every year with the Realtors Association. So part of the continuing education with the realtors in and around these mountain communities is that they've got to take kind of some of these continuing education classes. And one of the classes that we operate or offer is a Living with Wildlife class. And the goal of this is hopefully to educate the realtors so that when they're getting folks that are moving either from the city or from other states, that the realtor can kind of educate them on ways that they can live with wildlife. And one of the big things that we talk about are those two things, feeding and then fences. How is your fence going to affect those property or the animal movement on your property? And we've seen it as a pretty decent success. At least it's positively received from the realtors, and they can kind of be ambassadors for the wildlife in that area and whoever their clients are. So I think it's been a good thing for us.
Yeah, you guys have a ton of education programs. There's a ton of information on your websites. You have social channels, which I think are great. I've reshared a bunch of your guys' stuff from social channels. Your Twitter account, you guys are putting out information constantly by region too, which is kind of cool. You can follow, I think, different regions, right?
Correct.
On Twitter.
Yep.
I guess I want to dive into a little bit for hunting's become super popular in the last couple of years, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys have noticed an influx, and I certainly have as a hunter.
Yep. How
many people are actually using, public land and these open game units, and I'm just seeing a major increase in it and a lot of new people to it, which I think is awesome.
Yep.
As long as they're doing it the right way and they know the rules and all that sort of stuff. What if somebody wants to get into hunting, but they've never hunted a day in their life? What would you suggest? And I guess, what do they need first and foremost legally to be out there, and so they don't get in trouble for poaching or some sort of violation?
So I think first and foremost, they need to go take a hunter ed class. That is a requirement for all hunters here in Colorado. And that class, even for non-hunters, I recommend it. One, you learn firearm handling basics. And so, how do I operate safely around firearms? Maybe, you have relatives or your wife or your kids. Maybe they don't have any interest in firearms, but you have them in the house. It's a good class to go to just to kind of.
I mean, I took mine at 11 years old, and it taught me shot geometry. I never really thought about it.
Yep. Yep.
up until then, like,
We cover a lot of different topics, obviously the safety aspect and the laws and stuff like that. But part of what we talk about is, the how. How do we get into this? How do you know where to go? If you've got a specific interest, whether it be deer, elk, or waterfowl, we can kind of point you in the right direction on some of those. I teach those classes as well, and I offer my card as well, my personal, my cell, and those folks that go through my class can call and I can answer any questions if they got specifics on a certain area to hunt. I can at least try and answer the question or direct them to somebody that can answer it. But so that's a decent starting place.
And at what age can you start that?
So I actually had a 7-year-old pass a hunter ed class in I think it was April. Usually it's kind of tied in with reading level and comprehension. So usually it's kind of that 9-10-year-old range is where most folks
and then
pass.
Big game is 12. You have to.
Yeah. So in order to hunt big game, you have to be 12. In order to hunt small game, things like turkey or other small game, you have to be, you've just had to get your hunter ed class or meet that requirement. But generally I've seen that be kind of that, 8 to 10-year-old range.
I want to bring up an important point too. Like, not just because it's a small animal, it may not necessarily be considered small game. There still may be an additional license that you need to acquire, like a turkey license or
a fur bearer's license.
Yeah, fur bearer's license. Marmot, right? I think that there's a season on that, but it falls under small game.
Yep.
Like, there's all ththese different variables dependent on the species too.
Yep. And that's all stuff that we coach when we're doing our hunter ed class. Like, if you want to have know all the ins and outs about waterfowl, we've got a waterfowl brochure that shows you all of the rules and regs, so you don't have to learn every hunting law. Like, you don't need
to almost pick it up at any gun counter.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you can download it on your phone. I've done that before. Like, I don't have my fishing regs with me, so it's like, wait a minute, before I hop on the stream, you can download it right from your website, which is cool.
Yeah, it works out really slick. And it's like, no sense in learning every law if I'm never going to elk hunt. Why, I don't need to know what those laws are if I'm just going to go fish. I just need to know the specifics for that. And so it really simplifies things in that regard. As far as getting more involved in the hunting, if you know somebody that hunts, obviously that's going to probably be your best way. Even if it's just going with that person for the first year, not even hunting. I think
more importantly, if you are a hunter and somebody asks for your advice, you should help them out.
Sure. Especially if you have any sort of, I don't know. For me, like, I feel like, I'm ethical. I've been successful at hunting. I want to teach people the right way. Like, I feel like I have an obligation to teach people the right way to do it rather than, letting them kind of fumble along and make mistakes. Like, you can learn from some of the things that I've done, and hopefully kind of speed up your progression.
I'm so fortunate that I had family members that have been bow hunters for generations and, back since like the Pope and Young era made it popular, and like, so all that experience, it was passed down to me, and I can't imagine trying to start from scratch. And I've run into guys constantly that are doing that, which I commend them too, man. Like, I think it's
it's pretty daunting when you look at it of like, I got to get all of this gear, I got to find a location, I've got to learn how to take care of all the meat. There's a lot to it. We do some classes. We do offer some of that. We've got a novice hunter program. So folks, we do one novice hunter. It's kind of an outreach hunt to folks that haven't had hunting licenses in the past, but they've expressed interest or gone through some of our other classes. We actually do an elk hunt kind of in the Golden area, Genesee area. Cool. And that's been pretty well received. And it serves a purpose, right? We're trying to manage animals on a property that really there's no public access, and we get a lot of animals at refuge there, and disease can actually be kind of a bigger factor. So there are some good opportunities for us to reach out and participate with folks that maybe don't have friends or connections to the outdoors, but still express that interest.
Awesome.
So, and we do outreach hunts all across the state. Turkey hunts, pheasant hunts, waterfowl hunts are pretty popular around the state. So all of that can be found on our website.
All right. Well, that's great, man. We're burning through the time here. I know you have some obligations, and this has been awesome. Before we jump off, though, is there anything that you want to bring up that I didn't bring up in conversation here? And I would have you back once a week, honestly, if you want.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. I mean, we can.
I know your time is, with all your responsibilities, I know that wouldn't work out, but I love having you guys in. And
sure.
I appreciate your time. And I hope that people that are listening to this are taking it in and enjoy it too. So,
sure.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is we're a resource for you guys. If there's a situation that maybe you experienced, or maybe there was kind of a weird hunting fishing situation that is this legal, is this ethical? Sometimes letting us know about that is important. You never know how important a little tiny piece of information is to our puzzle that we're trying to put together on maybe a big poaching case. So that's important. But also, you'd use us if you've got questions about different hunting areas or just any of that. Feel free to let us know, because we're all hunters, we're all anglers, and we're all passionate about sharing the knowledge that we have with other folks, is we want people to be successful when they're out in the outdoors as well. Obviously don't call me the night before the season starts and ask me, where's the best wallow where's at? The elk at? But right, I'm willing to give folks a lot of information. They have to be willing also to.
If I draw my tag, I will be calling you. I should find out here in a few days.
Right.
And if I draw the elk tag that I want, I definitely want to talk to you, but I'll talk to you.
Sure.
Once I get it.
Sure. Well, I wish you the best. I'm hoping I'll get some tags too.
Yeah, no, it's so do you guys have to put in for a license? I mean, do you get a license for free?
Oh no.
Really?
No. We get no
after
perks.
all this time and
we get
volunteer time you put in.
Yeah.
No perks, huh?
No perks on any of that. Wow. So we're in the same boat as everybody else. But
okay.
The difference is I pretty much scout all day or all year long. If I'm working in a particular area, I would usually have a pretty decent idea where critters live.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, let's drop websites. Gabby, we might need your help for this a little bit, because the Twitter handles are all kind of different, and I sometimes have trouble finding them. And I'm sure that you're not the guy that's actually pushing the tweets out, are you?
I'm not a tweeter.
So the website is coloradoparksandwildlife.org, I believe.
Yeah,
or no,
cpw.state.co.us. Any of this, if you just Google Colorado Parks and Wildlife, you'll get to the right spot.
I don't think I've typed in a web address, even to our website, in years. It's just Google it and then go from there. Yeah, and then Twitter, Instagram, all that sort of stuff. We'll put links in the show notes if you're interested in following Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I encourage you to, especially if you're fishing, hunting, any even if you're just recreating in the outdoors, especially the Twitter accounts for your region. You guys will post like, hey, there's a mountain lion issue in this area, or I've seen heavy elk activity at this trail crossing or whatever. You guys are really good about pumping that information out.
Mm-hmm. I think too, we have a lot of complex wildlife situations, whether it be bears getting into houses or different kind of just controversial type situations when it comes to wildlife. Don't be I guess if you have questions about that situation, call your local wildlife officer. They'll be more than willing to talk to you about the situation and kind of try and articulate, hey, this is why we chose to do what we did, because not all the time is our decision to put down a bear favorable in the community. And I assure you, I don't like doing that. But reach out, call us, and we can certainly have that conversation with you of, hey, this is what happened, this is the situation, and we like to be transparent and upfront and honest with folks. And I just like you and I, if you got questions, call me.
That's
and,
great.
And we're
man.
always available.
Yeah, you've always picked up the phone and gotten back to me, so I appreciate that. The other thing that I think is super important too, or that you can do if you want to learn more about this or you enjoyed this podcast, we've recorded multiple podcasts with yourself, with Bridget, with some other people from Colorado Parks and Wildlife and other game wardens and stuff like that, past game wardens. So go back and listen to those. Look those up. They're pretty easy to find. Yeah. Scott, thanks again, man.
Thank you.
Gabby, you good over there? Everybody, thank you for listening. And thanks for listening to the Mountain Side Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountain Side Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountain Side Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com.